If you grew up in the early 90s, you'll remember one of gaming's greatest arguments. Sega does what Nintendo don't.
Genesis does.
16-bit arcade graphics.
You can't do this on Nintendo. Genesis does.
16-bit sports action.
You can't do this on Nintendo. Genesis
Does.
Genesis
Does.
Genesis
Does.
Genesis
Does.
Genesis does.
Get Joe Montana free, Pat Riley free, Buster Douglas free, Super Monaco GP free, or Collins free.
What Nintendo don't.
It was plastered across TV adverts, shouted across school playgrounds, and probably started more arguments than football. But here's the funny thing, if you looked purely at the specifications, the Super Nintendo actually had several hardware advantages. It could display more colours, supported hardware transparency effects, and even had built-in sprite scaling and rotation through Mode 7. Meanwhile, the Mega Drive looked like the underdog. It had a much smaller on-screen colour limit, no native sprite scaling, no sprite rotation, and no fancy transparency. And yet, somehow, developers kept producing games that made people ask, hang on, how is this even running on a Mega Drive? I'm Ash, welcome back to Popcorn Respawn, and today we're counting down 17 Mega Drive games that push Sega's 16-bit console right to its limits. No Mega CD, no 32X, no enhancement chips. Well, almost. We'll get to that little exception later. To understand just how miraculous the games on this list truly are, we have to look at the baseline constraints these developers were fighting against. First, the entire system was driven by a single Motorola 68000 CPU, running at a modest 7.6 MHz. Next, its video display processor was rigidly locked to just two background planes, a sprite layer and a window plane. When it came to visuals, developers faced a brutal colour ceiling. The system could only display a maximum of 64 colours on screen at once, selected from a master palette of just 512. And if you want to rotate or scale an asset, the hardware offered absolutely zero native support for sprite scaling or rotation. On paper, the Mega Drive shouldn't have been able to pull off half the visual stunts you're about to see, yet through raw programming wizardry and assembly level defiance, these 17 masterpieces did the impossible. This isn't a definitive list, these are simply the games that, in my opinion, squeeze the most out of Sega's hardware from a visual point of view. If I've missed any of your favourites, just let me know in the comments below. Road Rash 3 is one of those games that somehow feels faster than the hardware should really allow. Electronic Arts gave the bikers larger, more detailed sprites than previous entries while filling the roads with rolling hills, sweeping bends and plenty of roadside detail flying past at ridiculous speeds. The illusion of depth comes from the clever line scrolling and perspective calculations rather than true 3D rendering, helping the roads rise and fall in a surprisingly convincing way. The digitised artwork also gives everything a grittier, more realistic appearance compared to many of the racing games on the system. It's rough, it's loud, it's unapologetically 90s, and knocking another biker off their motorcycle with a chain is still every bit as satisfying today. Or Sonic 3D Blast, it's one of those games that always seems to start an argument. Some people love it, others would rather pretend it never happened. But whatever you think about the gameplay, the technology deserves enormous respect. Traveller's Tales filled the cartridge with beautifully rendered isometric graphics created from high-end Silicon Graphics Workstation 3D models, giving the game a look unlike almost anything else on the hardware. Because the Mega Drive has no native concept of a 3D Z-axis, the engine has to constantly calculate sorting algorithms to ensure Sonic correctly moves behind loops, bridges and enemies without the layers clipping out. To squeeze even more performance out of the architecture, the developers famously exploited a hardware quirk in the cartridge slot itself. The code was programmed to handle unexpected software crashes by instantly resetting the game into a secret level select menu rather than locking up. It was a brilliantly stubborn piece of engineering that squeezed every last drop of 16-bit processing power out of a console facing down the 32-bit generation. Konami clearly weren't interested in making ordinary platformers. Rocket Knight Adventures is bursting with colour, personality and some wonderfully inventive set pieces that still feel fresh today. The biggest visual challenge was Sparkster's Rocket Pack. As he blasts around the screen at ridiculous speeds, the game has to keep streaming in new scenery while filling the screen with explosions, enemies and smoke trails. Large bosses are cleverly assembled from multiple smaller sprites rather than one enormous graphic, allowing them to move with surprising fluidity while staying within the Mega Drive's hardware limits. The result is a game that always feels fast, always feels exciting and somehow never loses its charm. It's basically what happens when incredibly talented programmers are given a platform game and told, go on then, show off. Beyond Oasis proves that RPGs don't have to be slow to look spectacular. Developed by Ancient, the game combines large, expressive character sprites with wonderfully detailed environments that feel almost hand-painted. Combat is where everything really comes alive. Ali moves with remarkable fluidity, chaining attacks together with animations that are packed with personality. Magic effects burst across the screen, giant bosses tower over the player, and clever palette management helps keep everything look vibrant despite the Mega Drive's relatively modest colour limitations. It's one of those games that quietly gets on with being gorgeous without constantly trying to shout about it. Most people remember Toy Story for its gorgeous pre-rendered graphics, and to be fair, they still look fantastic. The character sprites were created from 3D models before being converted into detailed 2D artwork for the Mega Drive, giving the game a look that was years ahead of many platformers on the system. But the developers then decided to throw in a curveball. Halfway through the game, you suddenly dropped into a first-person maze that looks remarkably similar to early PC shooters like Wolfenstein 3D. The Mega Drive wasn't designed for this sort of thing, so the game uses clever software-based rendering techniques to create the illusion of moving through a 3D world without using any specialist hardware. No, it isn't true 3D, but for a standard Mega Drive cartridge, it's still incredibly ambitious. Not content with that, the developers also threw in a Micro Machines and Mario Kart inspired driving levels, just because they could. If someone asked me to show them one Mega Drive game that screams blast processing, this would probably be it. Whether blast processing actually meant much is still up for debate, but Thunder Force 4 certainly looked like the marketing department wasn't lying. Technosoft packed the game with layer upon layer of scrolling backgrounds, creating one of the greatest demonstrations of parallax scrolling ever seen on a home console. Mountains drift slowly in the distance, clouds race across the middle ground, mechanical structures slide past in the foreground. Everything moves independently, creating an incredible sense of depth while you're desperately trying not to fly into absolutely everything. The screen is constantly filled with enemies, lasers and explosions, yet the game rarely loses its sense of speed or spectacle. 30 years later, it's still one of the finest looking shooters ever made. There really isn't another game that looks quite like Earthworm Jim 2. Everything about it feels like a Saturday morning cartoon that accidentally escaped onto a Mega Drive cartridge. Many of the characters and animations were created using hand-drawn artwork before being digitised into the game, giving Jim and his bizarre cast an incredibly expressive style that's still instantly recognisable today. The backgrounds are equally imaginative, constantly changing themes and throwing bizarre visual ideas at the player. One minute you're in a circus, the next you're being chased by things that make absolutely no sense. Earthworm Jim is pure, unadulterated 16-bit attitude. It's loud, it's completely unpredictable, and it's a total blast to watch in motion. Who says the Mega Drive stopped evolving in the 90s? Nearly 25 years after Sega officially moved on, Bitmap Bureau released Xeno Crisis and reminded everyone just how much untapped potential the hardware still had. Thanks to decades of reverse engineering and a far deeper understanding of the console's quirks, the developers were able to squeeze an astonishing amount of action onto the screen. Enemy swarms, explosions, flying bullets and chunky pixel art all come together without the game ever feeling overwhelmed. The programmers also made excellent use of DMA transfers and careful memory management to keep everything moving smoothly. It's not magic, it's simply 30 years of accumulated knowledge being applied to hardware the developers in '91 were still figuring out, and the results speak for themselves. Konami clearly wanted to prove they didn't need Mode 7 to impress anyone. The Atlantis stage remains one of the greatest visual showcases on the console. The shimmering water reflection is created by drawing mirrored graphics and then distorting them with carefully timed horizontal scrolling changes, producing an effect that's still impressive 3 decades later. And then there's the famous Leaning Tower of Pisa. As you climb high, the entire tower appears to sway beneath your feet. The illusion comes from altering the horizontal scroll values across different scan lines, making the structure bend and twist despite the background technically remaining flat. It's sort of an effect that makes you stop playing for a moment just to appreciate how on earth they pulled it off. By the time Sonic 3 arrived, Sega's developers knew the Mega Drive inside out, and it shows. The levels are enormous, packed with alternate routes, hidden areas and enough visual detail to make any earlier Mega Drive games look positively primitive. Keeping everything moving at Sonic speed was no small task. The game constantly streams new level data into video memory as you race through loops, corkscrews and giant set pieces, ensuring the world keeps up with the blue blur without missing a beat. And then there are the special stages. Using clever scaling and scrolling techniques, Sega created the illusion of running around a rotating 3-dimensional sphere despite the hardware having no built-in support for anything like it. It's fast, it's colourful, it's effortlessly confident, and for many people, this was the Mega Drive at its absolute peak. Sometimes graphics aren't about flashy tricks, sometimes they're about incredible artists. Streets of Rage 2 is still one of the best looking beat 'em ups ever made because every single sprite oozes personality. The artists cleverly used pixel dithering to fake smooth gradients that simply weren't possible within the Mega Drive's colour limitations. On a CRT television, your eyes naturally blended those pixels together, making everything appear far richer than it actually was. The character animation is equally impressive. Axel's punches have real weight. Max looks like he could bench press a family hatchback, and Blaze somehow managed to kick people in the face while looking cooler than everyone else in gaming. Even the rain during the opening scene isn't true transparency. Instead, clever raster effects and palette changes create the illusion of translucent rainfall, proving once again that Mega Drive developers rarely accepted the hardware can't do that as an answer. Contra Hard Corps has all the subtlety of a fireworks factory exploding. The screen is constantly packed with enemies, bullets, explosions and bosses that barely fit on your television. Rather than building enormous enemies as single sprites, Konami cleverly assembled them from lots of smaller sprite pieces that allowed them to animate huge bosses while working around the Mega Drive sprite limitations. The game also offers excellent use of fast DMA transfers to keep graphics flowing into the video memory as efficiently as possible, helping maintain its relentless pace throughout the action. It's chaotic, it's brutally difficult, and somehow, even with everything happening at once, it rarely feels like the Mega Drive is struggling to keep up. So, remember earlier when I said we were only talking about standard Mega Drive cartridges? Well, here's the exception. Virtua Racing arrived with its own Sega Virtual Processor, or SVP, built directly into the cartridge. Think of it as giving the Mega Drive a very clever assistant whose only job was to handle the complicated maths needed for 3D graphics. Without it, this game simply wouldn't exist. The SVP chip allowed the Mega Drive to render flat-shaded, polygonal cars, tracks and scenery at a level that was astonishing for a home console in 1994. Sure, by modern standards, it looks like someone folded a handful of cardboard into racing cars, but back then, this genuinely felt like the future. Switching between cockpit view, chase camera and overhead angles only added to the illusion that Sega had somehow squeezed an arcade machine into your living room. It's one of the most technical achievements on the system, even if it needed a little extra help. If there was ever a game designed to bully the Mega Drive hardware, this is probably it. Treasure somehow built an enormous uninterrupted boss rush filled with enormous creatures, spectacular animation and some of the fastest action you'll find anywhere on the system. The developers made extremely efficient use of DMA transfers to stream new graphics into the video memory between frames, allowing many bosses to transform and animate in ways that seemed almost impossible on Sega's hardware. Every fight throws another bizarre creation onto the screen. Half the time, you don't even know what you're looking at. Is it a robot? Is it a dragon? A mutant chicken? Honestly, by boss number 12, you stop asking questions and just keep shooting. Alien Soldier isn't just technically impressive, it's completely bonkers. If smooth animation had an Olympic event, Shinobi 3 would be taking home the gold. Sega didn't rely on flashy gimmicks here. Instead, they focused on making every movement feel incredibly fluid. Joe Musashi has a huge range of beautifully animated attacks, jumps and acrobatics that still look fantastic today. The famous horse riding and surfing stages are where the game really flexes its muscles. Multiple layers of parallax scrolling move at different speeds to create an impressive sense of depth and speed, making each level feel far larger than it actually is. The effect is simple in principle but incredibly effective. Sometimes the smartest programming isn't about showing off, it's about making everything feel effortless. If you ever wanted proof that programmers occasionally practice witchcraft, Ranger X is Exhibit A. On paper, the Mega Drive could only display 64 colours at once. Watching Ranger X, you'd swear someone forgot to tell the developers. One of the biggest reasons the game looks so rich is its brilliant use of the Mega Drive shadow and highlight mode. This little used feature allowed certain colours to appear lighter or darker depending on how much they were drawn, giving the illusion of a much richer palette without actually increasing the number of colours on screen. Throw in beautifully layered parallax scrolling, metallic environments and some wonderfully smooth animation and the result feels years ahead of many early Mega Drive releases. It's one of those games that makes you wonder how many developers really understood the hardware. If there was ever a game that made people stop and say, "I've never seen anything like that," it was Comix Zone. Released near the end of the Mega Drive's life, this wasn't just a game with a comic book art style. The entire adventure played out across the pages of a living comic. Sketch smashes through panel borders, leaps between frames, and even interacts with speech bubbles as part of the gameplay. Behind the scenes, clever use of the Mega Drive's background planes, sprites, and palette management help bring the illusion to life. It's one of the most visually original games ever released on the Mega Drive. While other developers chased bigger sprites or more colours, Comix Zone did something far harder to achieve. It created a game that looked unlike anything else on the system. Looking back today, it's easy to focus on the numbers. 64 colours, no hardware sprite scaling, no sprite rotation, no fancy transparency. On paper, the Mega Drive looked like it was fighting with one hand tied behind its back, but great games have never been built on specifications alone. They've been built by talented artists, brilliant programmers, and developers stubborn enough to ignore what the hardware was supposed to do. That's why so many of these games still look fantastic today, not because they had the most powerful hardware, but because they squeezed every last drop out of the hardware they had. Now it's over to you. Which Mega Drive game made your jaw hit the floor back in the day? Did I miss one that deserves a place on this list? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one, even the ones telling me I've completely lost my mind. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to Popcorn Respawn if you haven't already. Thanks for watching, and until the next time, see ya!
Ooh, videos and I'm in my eye.